Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? You know, my friends and I talk a lot about culture of play, and by culture of play, I mean all the things that we do to create a certain atmosphere or feel at the table. You know, the various ways that we interact with each other, the way we decide in any given game, you know, how to approach the game. You know, all the little things we do to create that atmosphere. But there's another facet of culture of play, and that's the talking about the game after the game, something that I've talked about on this channel quite a bit. And part of the expected culture of play in some of the groups I've been involved with is the idea that, you know, in between sessions, we're going to make recap and reflections videos and talk about what we learned, what the experience was like, maybe learning the game, things that we did right, did wrong, you know, all our various reflections. And so, you know, we've been playing The Veil. We've just played our fourth full session. Same old G ran 3 sessions. He ran a solo session for my character as well. I just ran a solo session for his character, and you know we got the chance to play with Anthony as well. So all of us were there, and this is an experiment that we started quite some time ago, and just due to scheduling, I don't think we played since February. And all of a sudden, once or twice in 1 week, we got a chance to play. Once we running Samuel G's character, as I said, and once actually running his character and Anthony's character. So there are a few things I want to talk about that really popped out in this session. I'll talk about the really fast stuff first. I mean, it was really great to play with these two guys playing together. I looked forward to that. They did not disappoint. The role play, the dynamics that they brought to the game were great. The two characters they brought to the game were really cool. One of the things I was really interested to see happen, I think we were all interested to see happen, is how do these two characters are very different men. How would they really interact with each other, especially in these really stressful circumstances where they're kind of pushed together? And you know, I was thinking about it all day today. We found these two guys that really, for different ways, they want to make a positive impact on the world. That's very, very important to them. And there's a sense of urgency. There's a sense of urgency for Yorn because he's a seeker. He's the guy. It's very dogmatic. It's very important that he do this. On the other hand, we have Cadmus, who is dying. And the entire game has a sense of immediacy, not just only because we're only playing 9 sessions, that's what we've agreed to, as we pass the GM baton from one person to the other, but also because he's dying, and we found out he only has a week to live. So we have a lot to cover. So I had a couple agendas for this game. One of the agendas I had was to get my character off screen, which happened in like 3 seconds. The other agenda I had was to bring together a bunch of information that I'd sort of synthesized, because part of the vibe with any game, and certainly with a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and even more so with a Powered by the Apocalypse game or any game where you're changing GM duties, there's all this collaboration going on. There's all these various hints and clues, and I sort of came up with this idea of what's really going on. It's not like we're in college, so we're going to play every week for 4 years. We have 9 sessions to do this, and Cadmus is dying, so I wanted to do a bit more of an info dump than I normally would feel comfortable doing, and get some information in their hands, and like, here's the ball, now let's see what you guys do with it. And I had a chance to do that in this session. I wasn't quite sure if it was going to happen then or the next session. I didn't want to force it upon them, but I knew there were things that those characters were interested in, they were probably going to pursue, and it was very likely they were going to bump into one of maybe 3 or 4 scenarios, and they bumped into the one that had the most information. So that was really very, very satisfying, even though there was a moment where it felt a little bit uncomfortable because I was kind of doing this big info dump. The other thing, really fast, was that this particular game, the playbooks in the Powered by the Apocalypse, or in the Veils particularly, they really can foster examination of some really classic sci-fi and cyberpunk themes and tropes. And partially it depends on what playbooks you put together, and this combination of the dying and the seeker and the apparatus has really suggested some really interesting themes, and it's not disappointing. I think we're all kind of picking up on that and moving the fiction, for lack of a better word, in that direction. And the playbooks themselves and what they're all about really kind of helps with that. But there were a couple things that I really wanted to talk about that I noticed in terms of like how we played. And what happened, and a lot of it has to do with like playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game. We made this conscious decision that we were not going to avoid mentioning the moves. Initially in the game, we started trying to do what the conventional wisdom for Powered by the Apocalypse games is, that you can find on the internet and other places, is that as players you should never name these moves. You should simply do whatever it is you want to do, and the game master should be able to pick up what move you're really trying to invoke, and at some point say, oh, it looks like you're trying to do a link move here, or you're trying to persuade somebody, or sway, or whatever. Time to pick up the dice and go ahead and roll dice and whatever. This time we decided we're not going to do that. We're going to show what it's really like to learn the game, because I think that's one of the neat things about putting videos of actual play when you're learning a game up there, is like, what is it really like? And also, we wanted to make sure that we engage with everything. And so this had the paradoxical effect for me. I found that very fascinating, that by not shying away from the game speak, it actually broke immersion much less. It was far less jarring to simply say, have the characters take responsibility and say, okay, well, at this point, I'm going to do this move. This is something that my character can do. Here's the effects, and here's how this works. Even though I had the sheets in front of me as well, they were taking responsibility for their characters, shouldering some of that burden. And I think it let all of us concentrate on the fiction a lot more, even though we were engaging in some heavy game speak every once in a while, and having a couple of discussions about, well, how does this rule actually work? So I enjoyed approaching the game that way much better. I may talk about this at a different time, but often you'll hear that conventional wisdom about Powered by the Apocalypse games, where it says, well, make your move but never speak its name. But then you realize that's in the GM move section, and sometimes I think people kind of conflate that or put that in the player move section as well. So it worked a lot better for us to simply go ahead and name what we were doing. Not try to hide the mechanics underneath the sheet and say, oh, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. The other thing that happened, which we talked about quite a bit afterwards, that was really interesting, is the length of a move. And in these games, very often, you'll roll, you'll always roll 2 6-sided dice, pretty much. And you can either score a miss, where you don't get what you're intending to get. You can score a strong hit, where you get pretty much everything you were intending to get, or a weak hit. In the Veil, in particular, a lot of times what happens is you get to choose a number of things from a list. Often there are questions that you can ask the game master and get more information. One example, Cadmus, Anthony's character, used an analyze move. He wanted to find certain things out. So he asked me some questions. And here's what I did a little bit differently, or actually a lot differently than Same Old G. And differently than I've done in the past running games, Powered by the Apocalypse games, with my limited experience. And differently than what I've seen a lot of people do. Typically, what I've seen happen, and what I've done, is somebody will ask the questions of the game master, and the game master will then answer them. It's a very out-of-character experience where it's this interaction between the game master and the player. This particular point, Anthony's in this, or his character is in this situation where he needs to get some information. He wants to find something out. His character is very good at analyzing. He rolled a weak hit, still got a chance to ask like 2 or 3 questions. And he asked, okay, well, how is this one NPC, W, most vulnerable to me? And the second question was, which is the bigger threat, W, or these cyborg, this X series? And so in the fiction, there was not really an appropriate way. It would really be a stretch for him to get that information based on where he was at that exact moment. And so I said, okay, well, bear with me. I'm going to answer your questions. And they were with an NPC that Same Old G had made up via a link move. I had another NPC that I thought they might at some point get in touch with, which had this amount of information. It was the info dump, if you will. And there was an immediate connection, a way to actually get them from point A to point B. We ended up role-playing. The move might have lasted 45 minutes or an hour, during which time Same Old G, his character Yorn, made at least a couple moves inside of Cadmus's move, if you will. But I was able to answer both of the questions that he asked in the fiction by engaging with where the answers actually would have come from, instead of kind of pulling them out of the air and really stretching or pushing on, ruining the suspension of disbelief. Exactly how did you figure that out in this exact moment? So oftentimes you're encouraged to answer this via the fiction, but oftentimes, or generally, it's a very immediate response. In this case, in game time, it might have been 45 minutes or an hour. In actual, inside the game time, might have taken him 2 or 3 hours to actually get the answers to these questions as he went from one place to another place and interfaced with another NPC. And we talked at length after the session, which is actually in the tail end of the video of the Veil Session 4, about that, whether that was in fact okay to do. Did the rules say you can't do that? Should you do that? It was actually a really interesting discussion. It was an interesting experience. And in general, when they made moves, I found myself giving them information or kind of completing the move in a more relaxed fashion that had more to do with the fiction than this dialogue back and forth between the game master and the player. So in both of those cases, where we had the long move and where we also named the mechanics, the experience was far less jarring and much more immersive, even though we engaged in some game speak. And even though sometimes I had to say, okay, I will answer those questions, don't worry, and kind of remind them a couple times, we're getting there, and feel free to tell me, okay, wait, if this is getting too frustrating or whatever, and gave them some opportunities. But, I found that those worked really, really well. I enjoyed them. We're still not sure, how Same Old G and Anthony felt about the long move. Maybe Same Old G. We'll see. We'll see what he says, because it was an interesting discussion we had about, is this really rules as written? And sometimes I think it's not 100% clear, but I found it fascinating the different approach, or how we approach the game as different game masters can make it feel very, very different. Anyhow, I had a really good time. I'm enjoying this experiment. I'm enjoying the emerging narrative. I'm enjoying the characters. Even or despite, every once in a while where we bump up against parts of the game or the system that we don't like or that aren't our favorite, and that's okay. That's part of the entire experience, and part of the reflections too is like playing with different people, playing with people that approach things just a little bit differently, and how did that work? So anyhow, kind of a long video. It took me more than one take, but I'm going to keep this one, and so I'm enjoying the experiment and enjoying sharing it with you and with them. So the end.